All right, I want to talk about the wide receiver 3 position for the Cowboys and some names that I think could potentially fill that role for the Cowboys this year and why. Ultimately, I don't really think it matters that much. So right now, it looks like Jalen Tolbert is going to be the wide receiver 3 for the Cowboys this upcoming season. Last year was Michael Gallup. I think that, addition by subtraction is a real thing in the NFL. And with the level of play that Michael Gallup was giving you, with the fact that he was getting paid a lot of money, so the front office wants guys that they pay a lot of money to be on the field and to get targets. It's just the way things are in football. I don't like it, but it's just the way it is. I think that you take Michael Gallup off this team, you give Jalen Tolbert, who I think honestly was a better player than Michael Gallup last year, more opportunities. I think that you are going to be better at the wide receiver 3 spot. And on top of the fact that there are some guys that can potentially fill that role that are a bit younger, that have some potential, right? There's guys like Jalen Brooks, who it felt like every single time this guy got an opportunity, he made the most of it. There is some good stuff coming out about Ryan Flournoy, the receiver that they just drafted in the 6th round, guy that has all the traits in the world. Jalen Cropper is another guy that I'm hearing good things about coming out of OTAs. Kevontae Turpin is another guy. So they definitely have some options there at that position. So I want to go over, last year Michael Gallup was the wide receiver 3. He got 57 targets. Jalen Tolbert was the wide receiver 4. He got 36 targets. I think that if you were to increase the target rate for Jalen Tolbert, let's just say to 60 targets or something along those lines, I think that you're going to see a more productive season from Jalen Tolbert. I like his game a lot. It feels like he's a very reliable receiver. He made some big plays in some games, right? Made a big play in the Miami game, made some big plays in the Philadelphia game. He was very reliable that game. So much so that I think it was a 4th down. James Bradbury was covering Jalen Tolbert. Dak said, I'm gonna trust my guy here because he's been making plays for him all game. He was very reliable for him that game. There was the play that he made downfield on the scramble drill, I believe it was, and then there was a touchdown pass that he caught. So I want to see more of Jalen Tolbert. Brandon Cooks came out and said, whatever the expectation is for Jalen Tolbert this upcoming season, I think he's going to crush those expectations. So, Mike McCarthy's saying some good stuff about Jalen Tolbert. I think you're going to see a better season from him than last season. And I don't even think that's a hot take. Last season he had 22 receptions, 268 yards, and 2 touchdowns. It was an improvement from the year prior. You want to see more from him, no doubt about it. No doubt about that. You want to see more from him. But heading in the right direction, can he get you 600 yards this year? I think if you increase the opportunities that he's going to get, I think he can do that for you. And ultimately, I talked about earlier why it might not even matter, because when you look at the top guys on this team, the top receivers, not just talking about wide receivers, just talking about the receivers in general. To me, it goes CD, Jake Ferguson, Brandon Cooks. Those are your 3 main targets, right? And the wide receiver 3 position becomes less important if you have a really solid tight end. And the Cowboys have a really solid tight end who I think is going to be even better than he was last year and could potentially be top 5 at his position this upcoming season. If he's not top 5 already, I'd have to go through the tight ends to do that. And I'm not going to do that right now. But that's why ultimately the wide receiver 3 spot isn't going to matter that much. But, in that position, I would like to get like a true X type of receiver, right? And I think that Jalen Tolbert can play that role. I think a Ryan Flournoy can play that role. Kevontae Turpin and Jalen Moreno Cropper, I don't think they can. Jalen Brooks potentially can. So it's going to be very interesting to see what goes down at training camp. I think that role is meant for Jalen Tolbert, wide receiver 3. And then wide receiver 4, it's going to be, a battle up there at camp for who could potentially play that role on this team. Again, when you have the type of guys like CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson who are going to command as many targets as they're going to command, I think that the wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 4 spots are far less important than they would be on a team, let's just say, that doesn't have a tight end. This is a team that struggled to get Brandon Cooks targets last season for, a good portion of the season. And if I'm Mike McCarthy, one thing I do this upcoming offseason is, how do I get Brandon Cooks more involved in this offense, right? How do we make that happen? I look at that game that he had against the Giants. if I'm Mike McCarthy and I'm saying, whatever I did that game, let's do that with Brandon Cooks, because he went crazy that game. And, I know there's going to be people that say, oh, well, it was just the Giants, man. They had Tommy DeVito that game. Okay, well, the Giants with Tommy DeVito also beat Green Bay, who went into your building and panched you in the playoffs. Okay, so, they were at least somewhat formidable. They were a somewhat formidable opponent that Brandon Cooks just went off against. So if I'm Mike McCarthy, I'm looking at how do I get Brandon Cooks more involved? Because if you can do that, that's going to unlock this offense. Because I thought Brandon Cooks was a good contributor last year. I want to see more production from him. I think he's capable of more production, but I do think some of this has to do with how are we going to scheme things up for Brandon Cooks, right? So the wide receiver 3 spot as a whole, again, I'm going to say it, it's not as important as people may think. And if you're panicking about like, oh, are we going to have a legit guy in that spot? I think you're going to have like a legit wide receiver 3 in Jalen Tolbert. Is he like a Tyler Boyd type from Cincinnati, even though Tyler Boyd plays more slot? Are you going to get the type of production that you're going to get from like him, let's just say? No. Are you going to get the type of production that you got from Michael Gallup when he was a wide receiver 3? Probably not. And wide receiver 3. And when I mean Michael Gallup, I mean before the ACL injury. You're probably not going to get that. Okay. But I don't think you need that because of the quality of players that you have with your first, second, and third options with CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, and Brandon Cooks. So that's where I stand on that. That's going to be one of the most interesting camp battles this upcoming training camp. So I'm looking forward to seeing it.